week, we briefly considered some of the 16th century social, political, and religious factors that helped shape Martin Luther's life and his career. Today, we're going to narrow the scope and look specifically at the indulgence controversy. An indulgence was simply a written declaration approved by Rome, absolving a person from their sin and assuring that they would escape eternal damnation. And I'm going to try to use this illustration just to help us out to understand how this all worked. I want you, if you can, to pretend first that you are a Roman Catholic and you're living in the 16th century. Okay, you got it? Here we go. So one day you find yourself outside the village bakery. The aroma of a fresh baked apple pie is overwhelming. And as they cool on a windowsill, you just can't help yourself. So when no one is looking, you grab one of the pies and you race home. But almost immediately, you are racked with guilt and shame, unable to believe that you are capable of such a dastardly deed. You rush over to the church to seek Friar Al's forgiveness. After admonishing you for your unchristian-like behavior, Friar Al speaks words of absolution, instructs you to pray 10 Hail Marys, and demands that you either pay for the pie or return it to the bakery. While still ashamed, at least the ugly ordeal is over. Or is it? Swiping anything is bad, but in the book of Leviticus, doesn't it say that pilfering an apple pie is really bad? So maybe Friar Al's words of absolution are not enough. Maybe your soul is still in trouble. Is it possible that stealing a freshly baked apple pie could have eternal consequences? Could one bad decision mean that you would have to spend additional centuries or even thousands of years in purgatory to work off your sin? Perhaps so. So why take the chance? And why not take advantage of one of the church's theological bailouts? For instance, if you make a generous contribution to the Pope's Patio Umbrella Improvement Fund, your time in purgatory may be reduced by at least a third. And if you make an additional gift in the name of your Aunt Mary, who unfortunately died last year, her stay in purgatory would also be shortened. And so, how could you pass up a deal like that? Now, that was a lighthearted, perhaps irreverent way of introducing a very serious and troublesome subject. The sale of indulgences in Luther's thinking was theologically and biblically indefensible. But that didn't stop slick snake oil salesmen from peddling these worthless documents, and especially to the illiterate and the poor. Blessed with impressive oratory skills, Johann Tetzel, a Dominican monk, was appointed to sell indulgences in the area of Jüterbog. He was forbidden to enter Wittenberg 25 miles away because the Elector Frederick had established his own get-rich-quick scheme. And let me explain. In the 16th century, the Holy Roman Empire was made up of hundreds of distinct geographic territories, and they were administered by 7 nobles called electors. These electors had the responsibility and the privilege of choosing the Holy Roman Emperor. Frederick became an elector at the tender age of 23, and he established Wittenberg as his own capital. Instead of taking up golf or pickleball as a hobby, Frederick spent his spare time and lots of money amassing a huge collection of relics. In part, these relics included the thumb of St. Anne, a twig from the burning bush, a thorn from the crown of thorns, a fragment of Christ's swaddling cloth, a piece of gold from the Magi, and some bread from the Last Supper. Masses were constantly held in the castle church so that people could, for a price, of course, view the relics, which eventually numbered over 19,000. In 1517 alone, 9,000 services were conducted. That's a little over 24 services every single day of the year. Now, those who paid to view the collection provided Frederick with a steady stream of income, of course. And according to the elector's own calculation, the faithful who paid up could shorten their time in purgatory by exactly 1,902,202 years and 270 days. Now, as an aside, initially purgatory was not a place of punishment, but the place where one could be cleansed of their sins before entering the bliss of heaven. Now, while Rome's super salesman lacked a trunk full of relics, Johann Tetzel carried in his hip pocket the Peter's Indulgence. The purchase of this document would assure the forgiveness of sins and help subsidize the building of St. Peter's in Rome. But as early as 1514, Luther complained about the garish promotion of indulgences and berated parishioners for wasting their money on such a worthless document. But back in Rome, authorities soon feared that their lucrative cash cow would be jeopardized if Luther was successful in shutting down this indulgence boondoggle. So with the controversy heating up, we now turn to one of the most well-known events of the Reformation era, the posting of the 95 Theses on the church door at Wittenberg on October 31st, 1517. The church door served as the community bulletin board and was not solely reserved for important governmental or church-related announcements. For instance, on the door, you could find a list of anxious teenagers ready to babysit and the names of the unemployed who were looking for part-time work or a cheap place to live. Now, much to the chagrin and disappointment of Lutherans around the world, it's probable, it's likely that the church custodian, and not Luther himself, posted the document. And instead of using hammer and nails, it's likely that a glue-like substance held the paper in place. So much for those dramatic Reformation Sunday bulletin covers where Luther stands defiant with hammer in hand. Because the 95 Theses were written in Latin, Luther obviously intended for them to be discussed not by the general public, but by church leaders or university faculty. The concerns raised, however, including the issue of indulgences, were of such interest that the document was soon translated into the German vernacular and distributed throughout the territory surrounding Wittenberg. Luther honestly believed that after reading the 95 questions, concerns, and comments, the Pope would congratulate him for sparing the church additional harm and embarrassment. The reformer, however, was either overly optimistic or overly naive. Rome was not about to admit to a theological blunder, nor pull the plug on such a successful moneymaker. Instead, they were insistent that the young monk from Wittenberg should appear in the Holy City to answer charges of insubordination and heresy. Already annoyed that the sale of indulgences was sapping income from German coffers, the Elector Frederick insisted that if Luther was obligated to meet with papal authorities, it would have to take place on German soil. Because a meeting in the city of Augsburg had already been planned to discuss a variety of political and ecclesiastical matters, it was arranged for Luther to meet the papal envoy, the Cardinal Thomas Cajetan. When Luther refused to acknowledge the Pope's absolute authority, he fled the city late at night after learning that Cajetan was planning to have him captured and returned to Rome for questioning. Approximately 9 months later, in the town of Leipzig, Luther would lock horns with the brilliant scholar Johannes Eck, E.C.K. The main topic revolved around the primacy, the authority of the Pope. Because Leipzig was considered a quote unquote pro-Rome town and fearing the possibility of violence, the reformer and his entourage entered the city surrounded by 200 students from the University of Wittenberg. During the ensuing debate, a variety of theological issues were discussed, but the critical moment came when Eck accused Luther of embracing the views of John Huss, who had been burned at the stake in 1415. The tactic was both simple and brilliant. If Eck in any way could associate the teachings of Luther with Huss, then Rome would be justified in punishing him as a heretic. Angered that the debate ended in something of a draw, Eck would return to the Holy City and encourage the Pope to excommunicate the young troublemaker. And this prompted Luther to write, "Here in Wittenberg, we are convinced that the papacy is the seat of the true and living Antichrist." Now, it's important to note that Luther was calling the institution of the papacy the Antichrist, and it would not be for some time until he referred to the Pope himself as Christianity's greatest villain. Angered and frustrated, the Pope prepared a papal bull calling for Luther's excommunication. A bull was a type of public decree or announcement. Its name came from the word bulla, B-U-L-L-A, meaning seal. To authenticate a document, a pope would affix his signature and official seal at the bottom of every important pronouncement. Approximately 100 copies of the bull were printed and distributed throughout the empire, and tradition held that when Luther physically received his notice, he would have to appear in Rome within 60 days. It was also mandated that wherever the bull was posted, the works of Luther were to be collected and burned. While this edict was obeyed in some towns, many principalities throughout Germany refused to destroy the reformers' popular works. Luther, of course, had no intention of traveling to Rome, and on December the 10th, 60 days after he received the papal decree, he tossed it into a fire pit. So on January 3rd, 1521, Luther was officially excommunicated, and according to Rome, those foolish enough to support him could also be excused from membership in the church. Rome believed that once Luther was dealt with, Germans would quickly forget and forsake him and return to their beloved Catholic faith. But just the opposite happened. The Pope was vilified, and all Vatican papers went up in smoke. The drama continued when, on March 26, 1521, Luther received a summons from the Emperor Charles V. And he was summoned to appear in the city of Worms to discuss the content of his books and teachings. Because of the volatility of the times, Luther was granted 21 days of safe travel. He departed Wittenberg for Worms on April the 3rd. It was a trip of 300 miles. Next week, we'll learn if Luther made it to Worms unscathed, and what, if anything, happened when he was confronted by the Emperor Charles V. Thank you for your kind attention. Now Barb will lead us